You walk into the room and they already know what you're going to say, not because they're psychic, not because they've known you for years, but because you've shown them. Over and over in 1,000 small moments, you've revealed the entire architecture of your mind, your triggers, your boundaries, your breaking points. The exact sentence that will make you defensive, the precise tone that will make you apologize, the specific situation that will make you fold. You think you're being authentic. You think consistency is a virtue. And in the fairy tale version of human interaction, maybe it is, but you don't live in a fairy tale. You live in a system of power dynamics, and in that system, predictability is not a strength. It's a vulnerability waiting to be exploited. Picture the people around you, your boss, your partner, that friend who always seems to get their way. Notice something about them. They shift. Today they're warm. Tomorrow they're distant. One moment they're agreeable. The next immovable. You can't quite pin them down. You can't anticipate their next move. And because of that, you remain slightly off balance around them. Slightly cautious, slightly deferential. This is not an accident. Niccolò Machiavelli understood something that most people spend their entire lives refusing to see. Human beings are pattern recognition machines. We survive by predicting, by categorizing, by reducing the chaos of reality into manageable models. When we encounter someone, our brain immediately begins building a simulation of them. If you do X, they will do Y. If you say A, they will respond with B. Once that model is complete, once we believe we understand you, something shifts in the relationship. The mystery dissolves. The respect erodes. You become manageable. And what is manageable can be controlled. Look at your own behavior over the past month. How many times did you react exactly as someone expected you to? They pushed a certain button and you performed your programmed response. They knew you would defend yourself, so they accused you. They knew you would apologize, so they acted hurt. They knew you would chase, so they withdrew. Every single time you confirmed their model of you, you made yourself a solved equation. This is why you feel powerless in certain relationships. Not because you lack strength, but because you lack variance. You've become a script they've memorized. The predictable man lives in a prison of his own construction. He thinks his consistency proves his integrity. He thinks his reliability demonstrates his character. And perhaps in some abstract moral universe, it does. But in the concrete world of human interaction, it simply means he's easy to manipulate. When people know your pattern, they can time their moves perfectly. They know when to ask for favors, right after they praised you. They know when to provoke you, right before an important decision. They know when to abandon you, right after you've invested too much to walk away. The predictable man telegraphs his punches. He announces his boundaries before defending them. He explains his reasons before taking action. He justifies his decisions as if seeking permission. Every time he opens his mouth to clarify, to explain, to make himself understood, he's handing over another piece of the map to his interior world. And maps are made for invasion. Machiavelli wrote about the necessity of appearing one way while being another, not because deception is virtuous, but because survival requires it. He observed the courts of Renaissance Italy, where transparency was suicide. The prince who revealed his full strategy was the prince who lost his throne. The advisor who spoke all his thoughts was the advisor who lost his head. Power accumulated in the spaces between perception and reality. You are not a Renaissance prince, but you operate in the same fundamental system. Every workplace is a court. Every social circle is a hierarchy. Every relationship contains an implicit negotiation of power. And in each of these arenas, the person who can be fully understood is the person who can be fully controlled. Think about the last time someone successfully manipulated you. Trace it back. What did they know about you that allowed them to pull the strings? Did they know you hate confrontation, so they escalated until you surrendered? Did they know you fear abandonment, so they threatened to leave? Did they know you crave validation, so they withheld it until you complied? The manipulation was only possible because your pattern was visible, because you were readable. Now think about someone you find difficult to manipulate, someone who unsettles you slightly, someone you can't quite figure out. Notice how you treat them differently, with more caution, more respect, more consideration. Not because they're better than you, but because they're unpredictable. You don't know which version of them you're going to encounter. You don't know what will work. So you proceed carefully. You offer more. You demand less. This is the power of strategic unpredictability. It's not about being erratic. A person who is chaotic is not powerful. They're unstable, and instability is just another form of predictability. People know the chaos is coming, even if they don't know its exact shape. True unpredictability is different. It's controlled variance. It's the deliberate disruption of pattern recognition. It's making yourself a moving target. When you respond to anger with anger every single time, you're predictable. When you respond to anger with silence, then laughter, then cold analysis, then sudden intensity, never the same way twice, you become unreadable. The person trying to provoke you can't calibrate. They can't find the formula. Each interaction becomes a new equation, and they never quite solve it. The same principle applies to generosity. If you always help when asked, people learn to ask without consideration. They know you'll say yes. But if sometimes you give abundantly and sometimes you refuse completely, with no discernible pattern, something changes. People stop assuming. They start considering. They start valuing your yes because they know it might be no. Your generosity becomes a gift again instead of an obligation. Machiavelli advised that a prince should be like a fox and a lion, cunning and fierce, but never only one. The leader who is always fierce becomes a brute. The leader who is always cunning becomes a coward. But the one who can shift between them, who contains multitudes, or who refuses to be reduced to a single mode, that one commands genuine authority. Most people fear this kind of fluidity because they've been taught that it's dishonest. They've been conditioned to believe that being yourself means being the same self in every situation. But this is a trap. The self is not a fixed thing. It's a dynamic response to environment. You are not the same person with your mother as you are with your employer. You are not the same person in crisis as you are in celebration. And yet you've been told to maintain perfect consistency, as if variance is a form of fraud. This belief serves the people who want to control you. Because if you remain fixed, they can position themselves around you. They can exploit your consistency. But if you shift, if you refuse to be pinned down, they lose their leverage. When they can't build a strategy against a target that won't stay still, consider the person at work who is sometimes collaborative and sometimes fiercely independent, sometimes available and sometimes completely unavailable. You can't take them for granted. You can't assume. Every interaction requires fresh attention. This is exhausting for those around them, yes, but it's also magnetic. People pay attention to what they can't predict. Now consider yourself. How much of your behavior is genuinely chosen and how much is simply habitual response? When someone criticizes you, do you always defend? When someone praises you, do you always deflect? When someone needs something, do you always provide? If the answer is always, you've become a mechanism, and mechanisms are tools. The shift begins with awareness. Start noticing your patterns. Notice the situations where you react identically every time. Notice the people who seem to have a remote control for your emotions. Notice the conversations that follow the same script. These are the places where you've made yourself known. These are the vulnerabilities. Then introduce variance. Not randomly, not performatively, but deliberately. When someone expects defense, offer silence. When they expect pursuit, offer distance. When they expect consistency, offer surprise. Not to confuse them for the sake of confusion, but to reclaim the architecture of the interaction. To remind them and yourself that you are not a solved problem. There's a moment that happens when you first do this. The person across from you will pause. Their brain will stutter. The model they had of you will glitch. They'll say something like, "That's not like you," or "You're acting strange." This is them trying to pull you back into the pattern, trying to restore the predictable version of you that they could manage. Do not explain yourself. Do not justify the change. Simply continue. Let them sit in the uncertainty. What they're experiencing is the loss of control, and loss of control feels, to them, like your instability. But it's not. It's their dependence on your predictability becoming visible. They'd built their entire interaction strategy around a fixed version of you. Now that foundation is shifting, and they're scrambling. This is not cruelty. This is boundary. The person who can predict you completely is not respecting you. They're managing you. True respect emerges in the presence of the unknown, when they cannot assume your response, and they must actually engage with you. They must listen. They must consider. They must treat you as a sovereign entity rather than a known quantity. Machiavelli observed that human beings are more impressed by what they cannot understand than by what they can. The familiar breeds contempt. The mysterious breeds reverence. This is why the leader who explains every decision loses authority. Why the artist who reveals every technique loses mystique. Why the person who accounts for every action loses respect. You think transparency builds trust. Sometimes it does. But more often it builds access. And access is not the same as connection. When you give someone complete access to your decision-making process, your emotional patterns, your internal logic, you're not bringing them closer, you're giving them a schematic. And schematics are made for exploitation. The unpredictable person is not withholding out of malice, they're withholding out of sovereignty. They understand that some part of them must remain inaccessible to remain powerful, that the self is not a democracy where everyone gets a vote, that there must be a core that answers to no external pattern, no external expectation, no external model. Watch what happens to your relationships when you stop being predictable. Some people will become frustrated. These are the ones who were benefiting from your consistency, who had learned to play you like an instrument. They'll accuse you of changing, of being inconsistent, of breaking some unspoken contract. Let them. Their frustration is proof that the dynamic is shifting, but others will become more engaged. These are the ones who were bored by your predictability, but didn't realize it, who stayed in the relationship out of habit rather than genuine interest. When you become variable, you become interesting again. They pay attention. They wonder. They invest. This is the paradox. The predictable person tries to maintain connection through consistency, but consistency breeds familiarity, and familiarity breeds indifference. The unpredictable person maintains interest through variance. They remain in some essential way unknown, and the unknown demands attention. You've been taught that people want to understand you, that being understood is the highest form of intimacy, but this is only half true. People want to feel they understand you. They want the comfort of prediction, but they're most drawn to what resists understanding, the part of you that remains untranslated, the part that refuses to resolve into a simple pattern. Machiavelli never advocated for chaos. He advocated for strategic calculation. Every variance should serve a purpose. Every unpredictable move should advance your position. This is not about being random. It's about being unreadable. There's a difference. Random behavior is just noise. Strategic unpredictability is signal that can't be decoded. Consider your next interaction with someone who thinks they know you. They're expecting something. They've predicted your response based on history. Notice that expectation. Feel it in the air between you. And then deliberately do something else. Not the opposite. That's still predictable in its inversion. Do something orthogonal. Meaning something that doesn't fit the binary they've constructed. Watch their face. Watch the recalibration happen in real time. They're rebuilding their model of you. And in that moment of reconstruction, you're no longer their subordinate, their project, their solved equation. You're a person again. Complex, autonomous, ungovernable. This is the mechanism of power that society doesn't want you to understand. Because if everyone became unpredictable, the entire system of social control would collapse. Institutions require predictability. Hierarchies require it. Marketing requires it. Manipulation requires it. The entire apparatus of influence depends on people being consistent enough to target. When you remove your consistency, you remove the target. You become difficult to advertise to, difficult to manipulate, difficult to control. Not because you're oppositional. Opposition is just another form of predictability, but because you're variable. Because the methods that worked yesterday don't work today. Because the pattern keeps shifting. There's a loneliness in this. The predictable person lives in a world of mutual understanding, even if that understanding is shallow. The unpredictable person lives in a world of distance. People cannot get close to what they cannot map. But this distance is also protection. It's sovereignty. It's the space in which you remain yourself rather than becoming what others need you to be. Machiavelli wrote for the prince, but he was writing about survival, about maintaining power in a world of predators. You are not a prince, but you are surrounded by people who will, consciously or unconsciously, to try to reduce you to a pattern they can exploit. Your boss, your partner, your friends. Not because they're evil, but because this is how human beings operate. We simplify to manage. We predict to control. Your only defense is to refuse simplification, to be in some essential way irreducible, to contain enough variance that any model of you is always incomplete. This doesn't mean being dishonest. It means being more honest. Honest about your complexity. Honest about the fact that you are not a fixed entity but a process. That who you are in this moment is not who you'll be in the next. The people who love your predictability don't love you. They love their ability to manage you. The people who can love your unpredictability are the ones capable of actual relationship. Relationship with a person, not a pattern. So stop explaining yourself. Stop being consistent for the sake of consistency. Stop making yourself manageable. Let them wonder. Let them guess. Let them realize that they don't actually know what you'll do next, because the moment they realize, that is the moment you become ungovernable. And the ungovernable cannot be controlled.